And so welcome to the HR Insights Navigating Blind Spots in HR and Decision Making workshop or webinar. Really happy to have you all here today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself and 2D Performance, what you can expect from today's workshop, and then we're just going to dive in. I want to make this user time as well as we can and give you the most value as we can in the next hour or so. And so let's just jump into it. So for those of you that we haven't had a pleasure of meeting before, just giving a little bit of background on Intuity Performance, we really believe that elevating team performance starts with understanding your people. The more that you understand the person behind the job rather than the job itself, the more that you can have an impact within your organization. And so what we look at doing is really building that peopling foundation within teams to better help them, communicate effectively, to build up more team chemistry. And we also develop managers and leaders through a few of our leadership flagship programs, as much as our one-on-one coaching or even team coaching that we bring to teams. And so looking at Intuity Performance is really your people development partner that helps strengthen communication, build connectivity, and foster emotionally intelligent humans. And the way we do that is really to help personalize our training programs and coaching to your team's needs, recognizing they may be a little bit different from the next person, and delivering those measurable results. Give me a little bit of background on myself. So my name is Scott Rust. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for taking the time of your day to join us today. I'm an ACC certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. I've facilitated and trained workshops and webinars within organizations and outside for over 2,500 professionals. And I'm also the co-founder and COO at Intuity Performance. And while I'm not working with Intuity, you'll likely, at least during the summer months, find me out on my bike. I've actually got it set up here in my office for the cooler months. And this used to be a picture of my puppy, but we've recently changed it to our 4-month-old Mila, who was dressed as a little strawberry actually for Halloween. Maybe that's the picture I should have picked for today, so I apologize for not bringing that here. But if you hear any crying in the background, it's just her saying hello and letting everybody know that, wishing you all a good webinar or workshop for today. So looking at today's takeaways. So what has brought us all here today? So the first thing we're going to be looking at is understanding factors that contribute to blind spots and might be having an impact within your HR practice. The second thing we'll be looking at is discovering effective strategies to tackle resistance to feedback, breaking through self-awareness barriers, and addressing habitual behaviors that might be hindering your growth. We'll also be looking at different practical steps to help identify and address blind spots, to really help lead more towards actual tips on self-reflection, feedback from the environment, and choosing the right training and assessment tools for your own personal and professional growth. And then you might notice a theme throughout this all is really exploring the impact of HR excellence and how we show up as more effective HR leaders, both for ourselves, but then also for the organization. Or I might flip that around, knowing most of the HR professionals I know can do very well in supporting their teams. And so if anything, trying to find a space to help support yourself within this as well would be great from there. A couple housekeeping items here. Feel free, we're a smaller group. Feel free to raise your hand, come off mic, off mute, and I want to hear from your experience. Feel free to even put on your video. I've noticed that, having your video on helps make this as interactive as possible. You can also be using the chat function. So if you prefer to just chat and write down your answers and share, please do so. Let's use the chat as much as possible as well. If we are in a group discussion, I encourage you to share from your experience rather than providing advice. And so what I recognize from there is it allows people to take away from what you've done or what you've done in the past, rather than hearing exactly, telling somebody what they should be doing. And if you do need to step away, just drop a quick note in the chat. No problem at all. We understand these things happen. And look forward to seeing you when you get back. All right. So just so we all are on the same page and have the same understanding, I just wanted to define understanding blind spots here. And so when we're looking at blind spots, it really comes to referring to hidden biases, prejudices, or gaps in perception that might impact your ability to make a fair and objective decision, whether it be yourself or your team members. And so I just want to ensure that we have a good understanding of this before moving on, as we will be referring to blind spots on a regular basis throughout this presentation. So I'll give you a moment just to read through this, and then we'll actually jump into just a really short icebreaker here. And I would like to hear from you, what is the impact blind spots might have in HR? And we'll actually use the annotation function here. If you're familiar with it, you can just drop down on the bottom of your Zoom bar, you'll see annotate. Feel free to type in directly using the annotation function to be able, type in here what you think the impact might be within your HR role. Or if you prefer, just type in the chat and I'll write it down here. And why don't we collaborate on creating a list on better understanding the impacts blind spots have in HR. And then we'll actually refer back to this list towards the end of the presentation and say, hey, based on what we've talked about so far, has anything changed? Is there anything new we might want to add to it along those lines? And so if you want to take a moment, like I said, type in the chat or use the annotation function. Let's work together on filling this out. And to give you a little bit of guidance, you might be able to think about either financial impacts, it could be cultural impacts, it could be team relationships. So we see here, so lack of trust in HR or in us versus them culture. Anybody else have anything else to add here when you're thinking about the impacts? All right, we have Ellie who's saying leading to making a wrong decision. Yeah, so these are all potential things that might be showing up. Or making short-term decisions versus longer-term strategy. I can imagine this resonates with some people as well. Okay, so it seems like we have a pretty good idea here of, some different things that might show up from an impact blind spots might have, specifically in HR. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to take a screenshot of this, and then we'll come back to this towards the end of the presentation just to see if, based on what we've talked about, if there are any changes or any additions we'd like to make to this. And so I'm going to clear this up here, and we're going to jump into the presentation. And again, want this to be interactive. You don't want me standing here for the next hour just speaking to you, so really appreciate the input. Let's keep the two-way kind of conversation going here. And so let's take a look a little bit at understanding and identifying blind spots in HR. So when thinking about it, factors that contribute to blind spots, they tend to fall into two categories. There tend to be either cognitive factors or psychological factors. And so looking at the cognitive factors, what are some things that might come up? Things like confirmation bias. People tend to seek out information that confirms their existing beliefs and ignore contradictory evidence. Has anyone faced this before or been in this position? Otherwise, something else that comes up is in terms of stereotyping. So having preconceived ideas about certain groups can lead to a biased judgment. When we're looking at psychological factors, we're looking at the implicit bias. So, having any unconscious beliefs or attitudes that might influence decision-making, or otherwise looking at emotional influence. So strong emotions can cloud judgment and lead to biased decisions. So I just want us to take a moment here just to be on the same page in terms of, there's these cognitive factors and psychological factors that might actually be contributing to blind spots specifically within HR. And these are just some of the examples that might come up on how they might actually influence things. And so if we're looking a little bit at the negative impacts of blind spots in HR, some of the negative impacts could be in hiring and recruitment. So blind spots can result in unfair evaluations, affecting employee morale or even career growth. Even biased decision-making can lead to, suboptimal outcomes, hindering an organization's progress. And so really looking at, from maybe a solution perspective, what are some solutions that you might be able to do to help avoid some of these impacts? Well, there's things like training and developing more self-awareness. There's looking at diverse panels or having more data-driven HR. And so we're going to dive into some of these solutions a little bit more in depth to better understand how you might be able to apply these within your organization. Now, I think we can all agree that, identifying blind spots within your organization can lead to better HR practices and outcomes. So some of the things that we might be looking for in terms of actually investing or investigating these blind spots is, enhanced diversity and inclusion, having fairer employee treatment, looking at, having a stronger talent acquisition team. So eliminating biases in recruitment can actually lead to a more skilled and diverse workforce, improve retention. I feel like that speaks for itself. And then even legal compliance. So recognizing and rectifying biases can reduce the risk of discrimination in lawsuits or any legal consequences that might come up from there as well. And so the next part here is I'd like us to take a moment to actually discuss a little bit further as to how can we close the gap on blind spots amongst your team. And so I've put together a few coach approach questions for us to have a little bit of discussion around. So one of the things that come up is around how can you be proactive in identifying blind spots instead of reactive? What can you do about reducing multi-generational, culture, or even behavioral blind spots amongst your team? And how might you be able to address unconscious biases or assumptions? So I'd like us to take a moment here and again, feel free to either use the chat or even come off mute where we are a small group. Um, which of these questions kind of resonate for you, and what would you propose, or what would you be able to bring forward for your organization that you feel would be able to close the gap in the blind spots amongst your team?
Would you be willing to go, hey, this is Sally. Would you be willing to go a little bit into the reducing the multi-generational? I understand the cultural or behavioral blind spots, but the multi-generational piece.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Sally. And we actually had somebody would reach out to on LinkedIn and ask them, "Hey, what are you looking for?" And I do apologize if it might have been you. And they were asking, like, "I'd like to learn a little bit more from the multi-generational perspective." And so, after doing a little bit of research on this and better understanding what they're looking at, it's recognizing that people from different generations might have different assumptions. And so, I'll use maybe some wild examples just to make it really easy. If we're thinking about millennials as being lazy, I'm sure we've all heard this from one perspective or another, or maybe boomers just not willing to make changes. And so those might be some assumptions that might impact how we work together as a team or how we collaborate from a different generational perspective. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying because I understand that because I think some of it having multi-generational workforce can be helpful
Mhm.
to decrease blind spots as well. So I was just curious how you're using it in that standpoint.
Yeah. And I'm curious if so you've gone ahead, you said, you know what, we're intentional about building our workforce. We recognize different generations have different expertise to offer. If you start recognizing maybe some of those unconscious biases or assumptions that are coming up with your team, what might be some ways you might be able to help support them in kind of noticing those blind spots themselves or bridging that gap? And I'll open up the question to anybody in the room as well. So I'll jump in the chat here. So we have Oliver who's saying, providing training programs that highlight unconscious biases as a good example. Ellie's mentioning, being open at sourcing and recruitment stage, to be open to different people with various cultural backgrounds, even ones with accents, gaps in employment, or not even related to industry experience. And so I think what I'm hearing there, Ellie, is hiring more for the person rather than just their experience or background from that perspective. Missy here is saying, revisit your employee referral program. So though it can be great, it can also lead to group thinking and our non-diverse workforce. And I think kind of building on what you're saying here, Missy, my understanding would be, we tend to hang around people that are kind of similar to us in terms of values or the way of thinking and everything else. And so if we continue to use a referral program, it just helps build more people just like us. And therefore, I think to your point, leads to more group thinking rather than that diverse thinking that we're aiming for. Ellie here mentioned having, active listening and being able to kind of provide training for people to better understand, well, how are you practicing that active listening? Does anybody else have anything to add here that might, again, help close the gap on blind spots amongst your team?
Hey Scott, this is Missy. I'm trying to write in the chat, but it's not working anymore, so I'll just talk instead. Um, Creating a psychologically safe workplace would be a good start, one where people can have their ideas, they can dissent respectfully, they can
Mhm,
ask questions without fear of retribution. The more that you can communicate with your team and get your team communicating with each other, the
mhm.
more that that seems like it would be um, exactly what you need, right? The more we put ourselves in other people's shoes, understand where they're coming from, ask questions about it, the better off we all are.
Okay. And so I think at the crux of that, Miss, you're really touching on, by having that psychological safety, it really has this foundation for people to build upon. I know Oliver here said, having contrarian thoughts. And so I think adding to what you've said here, by having that psychological safety, it helps actually have contrarian thoughts and leads to more proactive approach and collaborating rather than kind of creating conflict. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And we have Dr. Bren here who said, one thing I've done in the past that addresses most of this is to have department-specific training, as well as spending time on different areas to get to know individuals better, to help them manage or navigate these waters. And so really looking to customize the approach depending on the individual that you're working with, recognizing that all their past experiences are likely contributing to their blind spots, right? And that might show up differently depending on who you're talking to. And so if I can add in a few things here, when you're looking at being more proactive and identifying blind spots instead of being reactive, you can look at things like diverse recruitment and hiring practices. You can even incorporate or develop diversity and inclusion councils, or even incorporate or implement anonymous reporting mechanisms within the organization to be able to hear about things. I mean, I guess that might lean a little bit more on the reactive state, but it does allow you to be proactive to be able to address something before it becomes a bigger issue than just somebody anonymously reporting something. When we're looking at reducing some of these multi-generational, cultural, or even behavioral blind spots, two things come to mind. One is looking at reciprocal mentoring. So, we talked about from a generation perspective. And so maybe it's partnering two people from different generations to get to work on a project and collaborate together in such a way that helps them open their eyes up to each other and what the strengths that they bring to the table, and can actually help build up some of that team chemistry and team bonds. The other side of it is looking even at behavior assessments. So something that I know we use internally is looking at DISC. And so that really helps be able to identify and place people rather than looking at their culture, their experience, and everything else. It's really placing people around, well, what is their working style? What is their communication style? Is it fast paced? Is it slow paced? Are they a direct communicator? Are they indirect? And based on those things, it allows you to better understand where people are coming from and how you can adapt to them. And then the last piece here on addressing unconscious bias or assumptions, I'll include, policy review and development, looking at inclusive onboarding and training, which I'm sure is at the forefront of your minds already, and then looking even at feedback and evaluation. And so Dr. Brent said, so these assessments are fantastic for groups. So yes, thank you for your contribution there. So let's look at a few of the different challenges and barriers that might actually come up when faced with these types of things. So when looking at the common challenges and identifying blind spots, one of the things that comes up is just a lack of awareness. Like, I don't know what I don't know. And so, many HR professionals may not recognize the presence of blind spots in their own decision-making process or even within their teams, right? And so a lack of awareness can definitely contribute to this. Looking at even a resistance to feedback. So recognizing, employees and colleagues may hesitate to provide feedback about potential biases. And so, there might be a resistance of actually stepping up and sharing how you're feeling or what's going on, depending on the environment. And coming back to what Missy said, depending if you have that psychological safety within the organization as well. And the third piece here is looking at habitual behavior. We're all creatures of habits, right? We feel comfortable, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. At the end of the day, we are, comfortable with habitual behavior. And so established patterns of thinking and decision-making can be hard to break and might actually influence might actually influence how people are thinking about others and how they're showing up. And so Oliver said, did you mention reciprocal mentoring? You mentioned a number of solutions. Is there a summary slide of solutions? Yes, Oliver, good question. And I'll make a note and send a summary slide specifically of that one in the email. Because to your point, I just had a few points I wanted to bring up, but I will send that out to you so everyone has access to it as well. Good question. Another barrier to this, specifically around self-awareness. I think this really is the crux of identifying blind spots. Is first, being able to raise our self-awareness. And so before we do that, it might be good to be able to better understand what are some of the barriers that come up when looking at self-awareness. And so one thing that might come up is just an overconfidence. As professionals, we believe that we're objective and biased, and that might actually make self-awareness difficult, especially if we have a lot of experience in a certain field or in a certain domain. It makes it more likely that we feel like we, quote unquote, kind of know it already and don't feel like we have to come back and revisit things. And so this overconfidence might actually impact your level of self-awareness. The other is, defensive reactions. So confronting your own biases can lead to being defensive or even denial, right? It's not always easy to look at the dark sides of ourselves or how we're seeing things, or have an awareness that, oh, wait a second, my way of thinking all this time was not the right way, or there may be a new way of thinking. And so that might actually impact self-awareness. And the last piece here is around fear of change, right? Admitting the blind spots may entail a need to change, which can feel uncomfortable or maybe difficult. And although I talked about these from a personal level, as if they're just being applied to you, I feel like these things come up even within our teams. Team members might feel overconfident in their roles. They might be defensive around confronting their own biases, or might fear having to change. And what does that mean for me? I already have all this other stuff on my plate. How can I actually address that? And so now that we've touched on some of the challenges and barriers that come up, I'd like to dive into a little bit more around the strategies or the practical steps that you can take in identifying these blind spots and overcoming some of these pieces. And so the first thing that we're going to look at here is strategies to overcome those challenges that we just saw. So when you're looking at, resistance to feedback, a few things that you can do, whether it be for yourself or even for others, is encourage open dialogue. Really helps foster a culture where employees feel safe in providing that feedback. We've already talked about, having those anonymous feedback channels. And so implementing anonymous channels for feedback can help reduce that fear of retaliation. And then training programs, right? So offering training and giving and receiving constructive feedback can be a great way of helping people better understand how do I approach this, feel more confident when giving feedback and ensuring that it's well received. Where, as we know, if you've ever given feedback and it wasn't very well received, you tend to be a little bit gun shy about coming back and doing it again, like anything else. The next piece here, and I know, Missy, you have something in the chat that I'll come back to it, is looking at self-awareness barriers, right? So engaging in self-reflection. So regularly reflecting on your biases and decision-making processes, or making this part of your routine. Looking at diverse perspectives. So seeking input from colleagues to gain alternative points of view. So yes, this is how I see something, but how are other people seeing the same situation or actions? And then the last piece here is looking at professional development, right? Investing in your leadership, your own personal development to enhance your self-awareness. It could be something as small as, coming to a 1-hour webinar on a Thursday morning or afternoon, all the way to investing in coaching or a full-on training program to support your own development. And then the last piece that we have here is looking at habitual behavior. So some ways that we might be able to change our habits is, one, having some mindful practices. Promoting mindfulness can help increase your awareness through different patterns and behaviors. Even having an accountability partner. So pairing up with somebody else to help challenge your ideas and help talk through these things, or say, hey, I'm trying to change this. Can you let me know, if you notice me slipping back into my old ways, can help kind of hold some accountability. And then actually creating an action plan, right? Whenever we're looking to make change, having some type of action plan, identifying, what's the end result, what are we looking to achieve, can actually be a great way of doing it as well. I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to read out parts of what Missy said here in the chat. And I'd actually like to hear from you as to, are there any of these strategies that you're already incorporating? Or is there anything else that you would have to add here when looking to overcome challenges in resistance to feedback, self-awareness, or even habitual behaviors? And so Missy here was just talking a little bit about the ways that we give feedback can at times be seen as an attack, especially if they're not done in the right way. And so ensuring that, we're providing feedback in a positive manner, so to speak. And then from a bias perspective, I think we're diving into some deeper stuff here in terms of our own self-worth. And whenever we're looking to make these changes or raising these levels of self-awareness, can actually be a bit of a shock to the system and can take some time to adjust to. And so giving people space to be able to do that, even if it's for yourself, giving yourself space to adjust to your own changes and things you're looking to do. Thank you, Missy. Another piece around this is, from the seeking feedback perspective, when we're able to get feedback from others, it's so much easier for us to even raise our own self-awareness. And so there's a big value here in honest feedback. And so honest feedback can help you, whether it be fuels your strength and can really be invaluable in uncovering blind spots, whether it be from peers, colleagues, superiors. I'd say even people in your own personal life can help you uncover your own blind spots. Other forms of value, honest feedback is looking at like 360-degree assessments, can help provide you more insight in your own behavior, your own decision-making, or even that of your team members. When looking at feedback like this, promotes open communication and trust within your team, encourages colleagues to, give feedback constructively and respectfully. So really helping equip them with the right tools to be able to give that feedback and create that environment that we're addressing blind spots for each other and helping support each other from there. And then lastly here, teach us how to actively listen and ask clarifying questions to help avoid defensiveness. So, Missy, you're saying this, but so what I'm hearing is X, Y, Z, rather than assuming that what I heard is exactly what I think I heard. And sometimes even reflecting back or asking those clarifying questions allows the person to take that step back and maybe reword what they're actually saying. And so just checking the chat here, Ellie is saying the biggest challenge for me is some team members, even supervisors, are not respectful and open to positive feedback. So what occurs is they repeat the same mistake over and over. All right. I wonder, we're actually going to be jumping into a group discussion in a couple slides. And let me circle back to this so that we might have an opportunity to discuss it and share a little bit. I'd love to hear from other people in the room as to how maybe they've handled this type of situation as well. The last thing I wanted to touch on this subject is looking at training and assessments. So recognizing that, raising that level of self-awareness, being able to understand how to provide constructive feedback, being able to understand how do you actively listen and ask those clarifying questions through training or assessments can really be beneficial. And so when we're looking at professional training or assessments, it can help uncover biases and tools for improvement. Oftentimes they can be structured. They provide evidence-based approaches that can really help address these challenges and provide support in moving forward. When you're looking at choosing a provider, looking at reputable coaches and assessment tools. So looking at people, either certifications, their experience, how they support other organizations, whether they're similar in your field or not. And then, researching and selecting an assessment tool that helps track as to what are you really looking to get out of this, right? What is the end goal for you, and how credible and what's the record of this assessment? And then the last piece here is implementation, right? So either incorporating this as part of your training and assessment into your HR development programs, or regularly assessing and adjusting training programs to ensure they're remaining effective. Unfortunately, when we're looking at training or even assessments within an organization, it's hard to say. It's not necessarily a one and done or a check the box. Those that work really well provide consistent feedback as to, what is the impact on team members? How is this helping move them forward? Taking a step further and even aligning skill matrices as a way of helping support individual growth can be a huge breakthrough on this. I'll pause here for a moment just to see if we have any questions from a training and assessment perspective before jumping into the group discussion. Okay, if there is anything that comes up, please do feel free to type in the chat. And so as we're looking at wrapping things up here, I think it goes without saying that, there are a ton of positive outcomes that can come from, recognizing and addressing blind spots, whether it be looking at, an inclusive workplace, improved decision-making, better relationships, or even personal growth. And so building off this, or kind of going forward from here, I did want to bring something up there. There was a study that was done from an HR software provider, Personio, and they interviewed 500 C-suite executives and 1,000 decision makers. And I'd like you to just type in yes in the chat if this stat resonates with you, or if you've ever come up against this within your own HR experience. And what they discovered was that over 50% of C-suite leaders admit they don't know how to use their HR teams effectively and as strategically as they would like. And so I'm curious if we have anybody that kind of resonates or has seen something similar in their organization. We have both Oliver and Ellie saying yes. And so I can imagine that, when you're faced with this type of situation, it brings on some challenges, right? It brings on challenges in terms of influencing or getting buy-in from C-suite, makes it harder to invest in learning and development, more difficult to demonstrate ROI on HR initiatives, or even obtaining appropriate annual budgets. And so if these challenges resonate with you, or if you experienced them before, I'd like you to share something with you that might help you overcome some of these things. And so one of the things that comes up here is Gartner research found that many organizations don't have the leadership talent or skills to develop and support their team. So over 89% of organizations are facing leadership gaps. And so what we've done is looking to help support you and your team. We developed this assessment to better provide you with actionable insights customized to your team. And so what it looks like is just a 20-minute short, brief assessment. There's 12 questions, and it really helps highlight some leadership gaps within your organization and identify the impacts in your team. And finally, and I know this is what other HR professionals have gotten excited about, is that we equipped you with customized data. So we've actually put together a calculator based on your company size, on revenue, organization, everything else, that helps provide ROI based on your team to help give you more ammunition when looking to influence C-suite, or provide them that black and white data that Missy was talking to help showcase HR as more of a revenue driver rather than a cost center. And so if this is something you'd be interested in going through, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the chat here. This is just a link to be able to book your own 20-minute assessment. For those of you who are interested, feel free to book it in. Just click on the link, find a time that works for you, and put your email. And it's as simple as that. And so if you are interested in understanding the impacts of leadership gaps within your teams, and receiving these personalized results for yourself and your organization, feel free to book this 20-minute assessment. We really, if I can talk personally here, we really built this out recognizing that a lot of the HR professionals within our network continue to face these challenges I mentioned around influencing C-suite, getting the annual budgets they need. But we really understand that at the end of the day, an investment in your people is an investment in your organization. And so we really built this out as trying to find a way to help provide more concrete data and ROI for HR professionals, help support their initiatives and what they're looking to develop. And so just jumping in here, Missy wrote, how about even understanding we are a strategic partner that is in their corner or could be for use. And I believe you're talking about the, how most C-suites don't understand how to leverage HR. And so I think that's a fantastic comment there, Missy, and you're spot on. Sally, I think, agrees with you as well. So as we wrap up, I want to say a big thank you for everyone for taking the time in their morning or their afternoon to join here today and to participate and contribute. It was really a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you, whether it be on LinkedIn or at a later webinar. So thank you very much.